My name is Maddie and I'm 29. I've learned that in my family love is just a polite word for access. It's the key they use when they want something of yours. For 29 years I let them have that key. I confused being the resilient one with being respected. I was wrong. The night of my rehearsal dinner, standing in a ballroom that smelled like Magnolia's entitlement, my mother, Jennifer, decided to use her key one last time. She stood up, tapped her champagne glass, and with a polished smile, she publicly announced that my fiancé and I would of course be letting my sister Sarah live in the cottage gifted to us by our new in-laws. She didn't ask, she announced. And in that moment I finally changed the lock. This story is about a family that confuses love with obligation. Have you ever been in a situation where you were expected to be the resilient one? Let me know your story down in the comments. I just stood there, my hand still in Joshua's. I didn't say a word. In my family, silence is often mistaken for agreement. But it's not agreement. It's calculation. It's the sound of 29 years of history rushing in to fill the vacuum. My mother, Jennifer, saw my silence and smiled, satisfied. She turned back to the guests, already accepting their congratulations on her wonderful solution. My sister Sarah gave me a little shrug, a tiny dismissive gesture that said, "What can you do? It's just how things are." And that was the problem. It's always how things were. For as long as I can remember, I was the resilient one. Sarah was the sensitive one. This is the logic of a toxic family system. They don't raise children. They assign roles. Sarah was the golden child, the one whose job it was to be bright and effortless and praised. I was the black sheep, or maybe the scapegoat. My job was to manage. I was the one who was strong enough to handle the disappointment. When I was 10, Sarah needed the bigger bedroom because she had more friends who came over. I managed with the tiny room overlooking the air conditioning unit. When I saved up for my first car, a used sedan that cost $3,000, my parents borrowed $900 from my savings to cover Sarah's class trip. "You can earn it back, Maddie." My father, Michael, had said she can't miss this. I managed. You don't realize you're in a prison when the walls are built from compliments like "you're so strong and we can always count on you." These are the invisible chains of the survivor. You're not being loved. You're being leveraged. You're taught that your only value is your ability to absorb pain without complaint. Your resilience becomes your cage. You learn that fighting back only causes more trouble, creates more drama, and hurts you more in the end. So you become quiet. You endure. You develop learned helplessness, not because you're weak but because you're smart. You've learned that the only way to win is to not play the game, to simply manage. This dynamic isn't an accident. It's the engine that keeps the family running. The golden child and black sheep dynamic is simple. One child is praised for simply existing while the other becomes the scapegoat responsible for the family's emotional and financial balance. Sarah's job was to shine. My job was to pay for the lights. So when my mother stood up and gave away my cottage, a gift from Joshua's parents, a home that represented the first stable foundation of my adult life, she wasn't just being thoughtless. She was balancing the books. In her mind, she was simply taking from the child who could manage and giving to the child who needed. The fact that the solution was mine was irrelevant. I looked at Sarah, who was now laughing, accepting congratulations from friends for my house. I looked at my father, who was nodding proudly as if my mother had just solved world hunger. And then I looked at Joshua. He hadn't moved. He wasn't looking at my family. He was looking at me. His eyes were calm. He wasn't waiting for me to manage. He was waiting for me to act. My silence wasn't agreement. It wasn't weakness. It was the sound of a 29-year-old chain finally beginning to rust. It was the sound of me remembering how to breathe. My mother thought I was just managing. She had no idea I was about to quit. The applause for my mother's solution finally died down. Sarah, seeing her cue, stepped forward, her eyes bright with practiced sincerity. She placed her hand on my arm. "Maddie, thank you," she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "This means so much. You and Joshua are saving me. I don't know what I would have done. This was the final move in their game. My public acceptance. My forced smiling surrender. The resilient one managing one last time for the good of the family. And in that moment the 29-year-old chain snapped. I didn't pull my arm away. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned my body slightly, a small movement just enough to face her and my mother. Sarah, I said, my voice perfectly level. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. A little pocket of silence opened up around our table. My mother's smile froze. What misunderstanding, honey? Jennifer asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. It's all settled. No, I said, still calm. It's not. We can't let you live in the cottage. Sarah's face crumpled instantly. Maddie, how can you say that? In front of everyone I thought we were sisters. This isn't about my choice, I said, cutting her off before the tears could become a weapon. It's a legal matter. I looked past her, making eye contact with my father Michael, who looked annoyed, and then at Joshua's parents, who looked confused. The cottage was an incredibly generous gift, I said, addressing Joshua's parents directly. But as you know, it came with stipulations. Stipulations? My father's voice was sharp. What stipulations? The binding trust agreement, I said. The legal term landed on the table like a block of ice. I watched my mother's brain try to process it. Joshua's parents, I continued, gifted us that home as a protected asset. It was placed in a binding trust in both of our names as the foundation for our new family. And that trust has rules. I turned my gaze back to my mother. One of those rules, the primary clause in fact, is that the property cannot be cohabited by any non-spousal third party. It can't be rented and it can't be borrowed. It is legally protected for Joshua and me and only us. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear a fork scrape a plate from across the room. My mother's polished smile was gone. Her face was pale. You're lying, she whispered. I'm not, I said. I'm a structural engineer, Mom. I read every document I sign. The inheritance clause, as the lawyer called it, is ironclad. If we were to let Sarah or anyone else live there, we would be in violation of the trust. The property would revert. Sarah just stared at me, her script completely gone. So you can't. No, I said we can't. The power in the room didn't just shift, it shattered. My family had built their entire dynamic on emotional manipulation, on guilt, on my learned resilience. They had come to a gunfight armed with feelings. I had just brought a lawyer. My mother's face cycled from shock to white-hot fury. She knew in that instant that she had lost. She had made her move in public and I had blocked her legally and indisputably in public. She had no one to blame, no way to spin it. I hadn't been selfish. I had simply stated a fact. The air was so thick I could barely breathe. My father, Michael, just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. Sarah looked like she'd been slapped. And my mother, Jennifer? Her shock lasted about 3 seconds before it hardened into pure cold fury. You did this, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You set this up. You waited until everyone was here, until my toast, just to humiliate me. To humiliate your sister. Right on cue, Sarah's face crumpled and the real tears began. I don't understand, she sobbed, looking around at the guests who were now openly staring. I have nowhere to go. My lease is up. I thought my own sister would help me. I thought you cared. She was good. I had to give her that. The performance was flawless. The trembling lip, the desperate eyes, the implication that I was throwing my own sister out onto the street. I could feel the judgment in the room start to shift, to pivot back toward me. I was being cruel. I was being heartless. You're right, Sarah, I said, my voice still quiet. You really are desperate. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. In fact, I continued, unlocking the screen. I know exactly how desperate you are. Because your mother coached you on how to perform it. Jennifer's face went white. It was the first time in 29 years I had ever seen her look truly afraid. What? She stammered. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the text messages. I said. I held up the phone so Joshua could see it. So his parents could see it. The ones you sent Sarah 3 days ago. The ones I was accidentally copied on in a group chat you forgot I was still in. I cleared my throat and read, Sarah, you need to start laying the groundwork. Tell Maddie how stressed you are about your apartment. Mention how you'll probably have to move back home. We need her to feel guilty." I looked up. My mother was completely frozen. Sarah had stopped crying. "What gets better," I said and scrolled down. "Here's one from yesterday morning. At the dinner I will make the announcement. Your job is to act grateful but desperate. Cry if you can. You need to make her look like a monster if she says no. We have to trap her publicly. She's too resilient to say no to your face if other people are watching. We'll handle Maddie. You just play your part." I put the phone down on the table. "You didn't just know, Mom. You were the architect. You wrote the script. You directed the performance." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't just shock. It was heavier, darker. This wasn't a family squabble over a house anymore. This was a premeditated, malicious plot. The twist wasn't that my sister was spoiled and entitled. We all knew that. The twist was that my mother, the one who was supposed to be the adult, the one who preached about family, was the one holding the puppet strings. Sarah just stared at her, her face a mask of betrayal. Even the golden child, I realized, was just a tool, a means to an end. My father looked at my mother, his expression unreadable. And Jennifer. She just stared at my phone as if she could make it spontaneously combust. She had been exposed and she knew there was no way to spin this. There was no polite explanation for this level of cruelty. "You, Jennifer," finally whispered her voice, shaking with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "You did this. You sat there and let me. You ungrateful." She couldn't even finish the sentence. She stood up so fast her chair screeched against the polished floor. "You've always been jealous," she suddenly shrieked, and the entire ballroom went dead silent. The music, the chatter, everything stopped. "Jennifer, sit down," my father hissed, grabbing her arm, but she ripped it away. "No, I will not sit down. This is what she's always wanted. To destroy her sister's happiness, to make everything about her. She's selfish. She's always been selfish." She was appealing to the room now, her face blotchy and red. The perfect polished mask completely gone, shattered on the floor. "Family is supposed to help each other. Family is supposed to give. But you, Maddie, you only know how to take. You come here to my event and you try to ruin it with your legal papers and your evidence." She spat the word evidence like it was a curse. "You couldn't just be happy for Sarah, could you? You couldn't just sit there and be supportive. You had to make this scene." Joshua's parents looked appalled. Several guests were openly whispering their faces, a mix of horror and from some a kind of dark, fascinated pity. This was the meltdown. This was the public self-destruction. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. And my silence, my calm was what finally drove her over the edge. It was the one thing she couldn't fight. She had come prepared for tears, for an argument, for a negotiation. She had no script for my refusal to engage. "I have spent my entire life," she seethed, stepping toward me, "trying to make up for what you lack, trying to protect Sarah from your jealousy, your moodiness, your emptiness." She was so close I could smell the champagne on her breath. "You were always the difficult one, the one who couldn't be happy. And now you've proven it. You've proven you would rather destroy this family than see your own sister have one single perfect thing that you don't." She looked around the room, wildeed, searching for allies. "Well, congratulations, Maddie. You've finally done it. You've destroyed everything." No one clapped. No one spoke. The only sound was Sarah, who was now sobbing quietly into her hands, not out of sadness, but out of pure, unadulterated humiliation. My mother had just confirmed everything I'd ever felt, that I wasn't just the resilient one. I was the one who was lacking, the one who needed to be made up for, the difficult one. And now, thanks to her public meltdown, every single person in that room knew it. She hadn't just exposed me, she had exposed her own poisoned heart. The room was absolutely still. My mother, Jennifer, was breathing hard, her face flushed with rage and humiliation, still waiting for someone, anyone, to take her side. No one did. Then a new voice cut through the silence, calm, steady, and full of an authority my mother couldn't challenge. "Jennifer," it was Joshua's father. He stood up slowly from his table, napkin still in hand. He wasn't angry. He looked disappointed, which was, I realized, so much worse. "Michael," he said, nodding to my father, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. My wife and I gifted that cottage to Joshua and Maddie. We gave it to them as a foundation, a start for their new life together, a place to build their future. He paused and his gaze swept over my mother, then Sarah, then back to my father. We have always believed that family helps family, he continued, his voice resonating in the quiet room. But what we've witnessed here tonight, what we've heard from those text messages, that is not family helping family. My mother opened her mouth, but he held up a hand. What you coached your daughter to do, Jennifer, was not an act of need. It was an act of premeditated theft. You attempted to steal the future we tried to provide for our son and our new daughter. You did it publicly and you did it with malice. He placed his napkin neatly on the table. We are therefore leaving. This is no longer a celebration we can be a part of. We will be speaking to our lawyers in the morning to ensure all our family assets, including the trust, are fully protected from this entitlement. He pulled out the chair for Joshua's mother, who stood without a word, her face a mask of quiet disgust. They turned and walked toward the exit. That was the signal. That was the moment the judgment became final. The other prominent guests, the ones Jennifer had been so desperate to impress my father's business partners, Joshua's family friends, began to stand one by one. There was no noise, no drama, just a quiet collective exodus. It was the polite, bloodless execution of their social standing. People gathered their coats. They avoided eye contact with my parents. They walked out of the ballroom, leaving a wake of half-empty tables, half-full champagne glasses, and a deafening echoing silence. In less than 5 minutes, the room was half empty. All that remained was my family, Jennifer, Michael, and Sarah, standing alone under the bright chandeliers, surrounded by the wreckage of the party they had tried to orchestrate. My father stared at the floor. Sarah was weeping silently into her hands. And my mother just watched the door swing shut, her face completely, utterly blank. She had been publicly tried and found guilty, not by me, but by the very people whose validation she craved. The humiliation was absolute and it was complete. We didn't stay. There was nothing left to say. Joshua just took my hand and we walked out of that ballroom, leaving my family standing alone in the wreckage of their own making. We didn't talk on the drive home. It was a heavy silence, the kind that settles after a storm, full of ozone and relief. The next morning I woke up before the Sunday. I felt empty, but not in a bad way. It was the emptiness of a room that has finally been cleared of clutter. While Joshua made coffee, I got to work. First I called a locksmith. By 10 a.m., every lock on our house was new. The old keys my mother had, the ones she kept for emergencies, were now just useless pieces of metal. Then I opened my phone. I went to my mother's contact. I tapped block. I did the same for my father and for Sarah. I wasn't angry. It was just finished. It felt like an administrative task, like closing an account that had been overdrawn for 29 years. Finally, I forwarded the text messages and a summary of the evening to my father-in-law's attorney, just as he'd requested. I was protecting my new foundation. I stood in my living room, the quiet buzzing in my ears. This was it, the final definitive cut. For my entire life, I had been taught that family was an obligation you endure. That love meant absorbing any amount of pain, any amount of disrespect simply because you shared a bloodline. And I finally realized the truth. That's not family. That's a hostage situation. Letting go of your bloodline doesn't always mean you failed. Sometimes it's the only way to finally find yourself. We are conditioned to believe that cutting ties with toxic family is the ultimate betrayal. But what if the ultimate betrayal is staying? What if it's betraying yourself year after year, shrinking yourself down to fit into a space that was never designed to let you grow? Sometimes the most courageous act of love is not forgiveness. It's refusal. Refusing to be the scapegoat, refusing to be the resilient one who just manages. Walking away from a toxic bloodline isn't an act of hate. It's an act of profound self-preservation. You are not a supporting character in their story. You are the lead in yours. 6 months later, I was standing in the cottage. Our cottage. The walls were a soft, warm white that I had picked out. Joshua was behind me, a roller in his hand, a smudge of paint on his nose. We were finally moving in. I looked out the window at the small garden and I thought about the night of the rehearsal dinner. My in-laws had given me more than a house. They had given me a boundary. My real inheritance wasn't the property. It was the inheritance clause itself. It was the legal ironclad proof that I was worth protecting. My old family taught me that love was just access. Access to my time, my energy, my money, my peace. My new family taught me that love is respect. And respect means having a locked door. For anyone listening who feels like the black sheep, for anyone who has been told you're the resilient one, listen to me. You do not have to manage. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Respect is the absolute minimum price of admission for family, and you have every right to lock the door legally and emotionally if they refuse to pay it. You deserve to be the foundation of your own life.